My friends, we have lived under a great misunderstanding. For generations, the world has been taught that life is something you must push, something you must build, something you must force into alignment through personal strength. And because of that misunderstanding, men and women rise each morning already exhausted, already burdened, already fearing what the day will demand of them. They rise believing life is theirs to manage, theirs to control, theirs to repair. And yet this belief, cherished as normal, is the very source of humanity's suffering. For the personal self, the self that wakes with its plans and fears and burdens, is not the self that lives. It is the imitation. It is the shadow that has mistaken itself for the substance. The truth, which has been whispered by the masters and demonstrated by those who have touched the inner kingdom, is that life is not lived by a personal self. Life is lived by the infinite presence expressing itself as you. And until this is understood, until this is felt in the silence of your being, you will continue to grind your way through days that were meant to flow, not strain. You will continue to seek supply where supply does not exist. You will continue to pursue peace where peace cannot be found. You will continue to believe that you must make your way through the world as a separate creature, cut off from the source that formed you. But listen carefully. There is no separation. There is no life apart from God, no mind apart from God, no activity apart from God. The belief that you must live by your own effort is the belief that hides the kingdom. It is the veil over the presence. It is the root of all fear. And the moment you release that belief, even for a second, a softness begins to enter the consciousness, a stillness, a recognition that perhaps you are not here to struggle at all. Perhaps you are here to yield. This yielding is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not abandoning responsibility. It is the sacred shift from human effort to divine grace. It is the recognition that the same life that sustained the prophets, the mystics, the Christ, is the life that breathes you at this very moment. And this life needs no assistance. It needs only recognition, only acknowledgement, only the willingness to be still long enough to feel its movement. When you understand this, you begin to see that the grind you have accepted as normal was never your destiny. It was only the dream of a false identity. And as that identity loosens its grip even slightly, the presence begins to shine through. A new rhythm begins to operate you. A new intelligence begins to direct you. And you discover that the day unfolds not because you have forced it, but because you have allowed divine activity to become the living of your life. This is the invitation before us today, to move from the weary effort of the personal self into the effortless grace of the Christ that abides within. It is not theoretical. It is not poetic. It is the most practical truth you will ever learn. It is the truth upon which your peace rests, your supply rests, your healing rests, your entire experience rests. And once recognized, it changes the nature of life itself. Now let us look more closely at what it is that exhausts us, what it is that wears down even the strongest among us. It is not the world. It is not the work. It is not the responsibilities or the demands placed upon us. No, my friends, the burden lies in the one who believes he must carry all of this by himself. The strain is born of a false sense of identity, an identity that claims, I must get, I must achieve, I must protect, I must survive. This is the false self, the imposter, the mental concept of a me separated from its source. This false self, this mental image, is always working, always planning, always anticipating, always fearing. It knows only reaction. It knows only defense. It believes it must hold the universe upon its shoulders. And because it believes this, it lives in perpetual tension. It never rests, it never trusts, it never yields. And so it grinds through life, pushing without harmony, striving without peace, acting without guidance. But listen, the false self has no life in it. It is not the life you are living. It is only the belief about yourself that you have accepted. And it is this belief that exhausts you. The true self, the divine I, the infinite presence expressing as you has never been tired. It has never been afraid. It has never worried, never hurried, never panicked. It knows no depletion, for it draws upon the infinite. The grind begins the moment you say, I must. The grind begins the moment you say, I alone. The grind begins the moment you forget the source and imagine yourself separated from it. Look gently within, and you will see the truth of this. Every moment of anxiety arises from the belief that you, the personal you, must control the outcome. Every moment of fear arises from the belief that you, by your own will, must keep yourself safe. Every moment of exhaustion arises from the belief that you, by mental force, must accomplish what only the presence can do. But what if this entire structure is an illusion? What if the one who fears is not the self at all? What if the one who struggles is not the self at all? What if the one who panics is only the shadow of a belief, long carried, never questioned? Goldsmith taught that the greatest liberation begins not with gaining something, but with releasing a mistaken sense of identity. You are not the struggler. You are not the worrier. You are not the isolated mind making its way through a dangerous universe. You are the transparency through which God expresses. And when this is glimpsed, even faintly, the grind collapses under its own falsity. If you will allow it, even for a breath, the false self dissolves in the recognition that I live, yet not I. The life that lives you is not the anxious self, but the timeless Christ of your being. And to the degree that this is recognized, the burden lifts, not because you improved the false self, but because you stopped believing it was you. Let us continue now into the next phase of understanding, where we deepen this revelation and begin to discover the activity of grace that functions once the false identity subsides. And now we come to the heart of the matter, grace. For when the false sense of identity begins to loosen, even slightly, something extraordinary and wholly natural takes place. A new activity begins to reveal itself, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet inner movement. It is the activity of the Christ within, ever present, ever functioning, yet unrecognized until we become still enough to feel its rhythm. Grace is not a special dispensation. It is not something given to the worthy or denied to the unworthy. Grace is the natural unfoldment of divine consciousness when the personal self ceases its interference. It is the effortless operation of God's presence as your life. It requires no pleading, no demanding, no manipulating. It requires only recognition that the life which animates the universe is the very life that animates you now. When you stop pushing, grace takes the lead. When you stop fearing, grace reveals the next step. When you stop insisting on your own way, grace reveals the divine way, not a way born of intellect, but a way born of infinite intelligence itself. And you will find that this way is always gentle, always clear, always harmonious, because it is the activity of the one presence functioning without obstruction. You see, we have believed that we must bring God into our experience, when in truth, God is the very substance of our experience. We have believed we must invite God into our lives, when in truth we have never lived a moment outside of God. Grace is not something added from without. It is the unveiling of what has always been within. The sun does not need to be instructed to shine. It shines by its nature. Grace does not need to be invoked. It flows by its nature. The Christ within you is not a religious symbol or a mystical ideal. It is the living presence of God as your very being. It is the intelligence that beats your heart, breathes your breath, forms your thoughts, and guides your steps when you are still enough to hear. It is the I that existed before thought. It is the I that was never born and will never die. And this I expresses itself effortlessly when the personal sense of I grows quiet. Grace is the effortless rhythm of the infinite. It brings the right people, the right opportunities, the right ideas at the right moment, not through force, but through unfoldment. It resolves problems without strain and heals without struggle. It arranges circumstances without your manipulation. It flows through your life like a hidden river, always present, always moving, always sufficient. But in order to feel this flow, you must be willing to step aside as the doer. You must be willing to surrender the belief that life is yours to carry. You must be willing to let the Christ live its own life as you. This is not abdication. This is the highest recognition. For when you yield to grace, you do not become passive, you become transparent. You allow the infinite to function without the interference of the finite. This, then, is the secret. Grace begins where the personal self ends, not through death, but through recognition, not through effort, but through awareness. And once touched, even for a moment, you will feel the current of divine activity leading you from within, and you will know that the life you have struggled to build is being lived effortlessly by a presence far wiser than the human mind. Let us move now into the next understanding, how this shift from doing to allowing forms the foundation of a new way of living. As grace becomes recognized, there is a quiet shift that begins to take place within you, a shift so subtle that the world may not notice it, yet so profound that your entire experience begins to change. It is the shift from doing to allowing, from personal effort to divine unfoldment. This is not a change in your outer activity. It is not that you cease to work, cease to act, or cease to engage with the world. No, it is a change in the inner origin of your activity. In the old way of living, the personal self, believing itself to be separate, initiates every movement. It plans, it calculates, it pushes, it resists, it forces outcomes. It lives by will and fear, by tension and anticipation. It is always doing, 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 because it believes that if it stops for even a moment, life will collapse. This is the state of consciousness that produces the grind. But in the new way, in the way of grace, you discover that you do not live life. Life lives you. You become an instrument, a transparency, through which divine intelligence expresses. You begin to feel that every true action arises from within, not from compulsion or fear, but from a deep inner stillness. Action flows when needed, silence flows when needed, and both arise from the same source, not from the personal mind, but from the Christ within. This shift does not make you ineffective. It makes you precise. It does not make you slow. It makes you aligned. You do not drift through life, you move with clarity, because your activity is not self-directed, but God-directed. Goldsmith often said, "I work, yet not I." And this is the essence of allowing. The ego does not disappear. It simply ceases to claim authorship. The personal self becomes the servant of the divine, rather than the attempted master of life. In this state, your thinking becomes lighter. You stop wrestling with decisions because decisions reveal themselves. You stop worrying about outcomes because outcomes unfold naturally. You stop forcing solutions because solutions come through grace. Life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like an unfolding story, a story written by an intelligence greater than anything the human mind could contrive. This orientation transforms everything. When you need to speak, the words come. When you need to act, the impulse arises. When you need guidance, the inner knowing appears. When you need rest, the body quiets. When you need supply, the channel opens. And in this way, you discover the truth. Harmony is the natural order of a life lived from the Christ. The disharmony you once fought against was never in the world. It was in the belief that you were the doer. As that belief dissolves, the grind dissolves with it. Allowing is not passive. Allowing is the highest form of trust. It is the recognition that the infinite is capable of running its universe without the interference of your anxious planning. It is the realization that your only responsibility is to be still, receptive, transparent, to let the inner activity of God express itself through your thoughts, your actions, your words, your day. And so a new question arises. How do we establish this orientation each morning before the world rushes in and the mind reclaims its old habits? This leads us naturally into the next phase of our understanding, the morning foundation, the sacred beginning of a day lived by grace. Now, let us turn to the sacred beginning of each day, for the way you meet the morning determines whether you walk the day in grace or in struggle. Most individuals rise and immediately step into mental activity. Before their feet touch the floor, they are already planning, already fearing, already calculating how they will meet the hours ahead. Their first act of the day is to return to the old identity, the one who must make life happen by worry and effort. My friends, the only true preparation for the day is not organizing your tasks, but preparing your consciousness. For if your consciousness is filled with the awareness of God, the day will unfold in harmony regardless of activity. If your consciousness is filled with fear, the day will unfold in tension regardless of how carefully you plan it. When you awaken, before you engage with a single thought of the world, pause, become still. Let the mind settle like water after a storm. Do not reach for the phone. Do not reach for the clock. Do not reach for the concerns that try to claim your attention. Reach inward. In that moment of silence, truly recognize that I and the Father are one, not as a statement to believe, but as a truth to rest in. Acknowledge that the day you are about to walk is not your day at all. It is God's day, lived as you. The work ahead is not yours to push through. It is the divine activity unfolding in its own way, through its own law, in its own rhythm. Sit quietly with this recognition. Feel the presence not as a feeling in the body, but as the silent awareness behind thought. This presence is not near you, it is you, not separate from you, expressing as you. The more deeply you rest in this realization, the more the false self dissolves, and the more the Christ becomes the actor of your day. This morning recognition does not need to be long. It does not require chanting, affirmations, or mental exercises. 5 minutes of true awareness is worth more than 50 minutes of mental effort. Even 1 minute of genuine recognition is enough to open the channel through which grace flows. Say within yourself, if you must say words at all, Father, live thy life as me today. And then rest. Let the words dissolve into silence. Let the silence become your foundation. Let the foundation carry you. As you sit in this stillness, the world loses its urgency. The mind loses its frantic motion. The body softens. The heart opens. You begin to sense that the day is already held in divine order, that every step has already been prepared, that every challenge already contains its own resolution. Nothing is required of you but receptivity. This morning communion is not preparation for living, it is living. It is the first act of allowing, the first act of surrender, the first act of recognizing that you do not walk the day alone. When this recognition is established, even lightly, the outer world reflects it. The hours unfold gracefully, events align, ideas come when needed, silence arises when appropriate. You find yourself carried by an unseen current rather than pushing against the tides of circumstance. This is the morning foundation, not the planning of the day, but the sanctifying of consciousness. And from this foundation, we move naturally into a new experience of life, walking through the day with the Christ as guide, companion, and activity. As the morning foundation is established, something remarkable begins to occur. You discover that the presence with which you began the day does not remain in the silence of that first hour. It moves with you. It walks with you. It goes before you. It accompanies every step, every task, every conversation. And the secret to living by grace is not to hold the presence, but to remember it, to return to it gently, naturally, throughout the day, until the remembrance becomes effortless. The world will tempt you again and again to return to the old identity. It will invite you into urgency, into reaction, into fear. It will say, "You must decide this now. You must solve this alone. You must take control." But you will learn that you need not accept this invitation. For each time the world presses upon you, you can pause just for a breath and turn inward to the truth. The presence goes before me. The Christ acts through me. The infinite lives my life. These brief recognitions, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, are not interruptions to your day. They are the very activity of grace. They are the quiet return from the false sense of self to the true self. And with each return, the personal mind loses its authority, and the divine mind takes its rightful place as the guide of your experience. You will notice that decisions become easier. They arise from within rather than from mental pressure. You will notice that conversations feel lighter, as if guided by an unseen wisdom. You will notice that difficulties do not grip you as they once did, for you begin to sense that every situation contains its own solution, waiting to be revealed through stillness rather than through speed. And so the day becomes a series of inner turnings, moments of remembrance that keep you aligned with the Christ. You do not have to force yourself into meditation. You do not have to stop your activity or withdraw from the world. You simply return again and again to the awareness that God is the only actor in your life. When you walk into a meeting, pause inwardly. The presence goes before me. When you face a challenge, pause inwardly. There is a wisdom here that I do not see yet, but it is present. When you feel anxiety rising, pause inwardly. This is not my burden to carry. I rest in the infinite. These are not techniques. They are recognitions, moments in which you step aside as the doer and let the Christ live the moment through you. And as you continue this practice, you find that the day flows with increasing harmony. You act when action is appropriate. You speak when speech is given. You remain silent when silence is right. You find yourself moving in rhythm with something deeper, steadier, and wiser than the human mind. This is living by grace, not abandoning life, but entering it fully with the awareness that all power, all intelligence, all direction, all supply come from the withinness of your own being. As this realization penetrates your consciousness, anxiety dissolves, tension dissolves. The frantic pace of the personal mind gives way to the calm assurance of divine activity. And so, moment by moment, you become a witness to your own life unfolding, not by your manipulation, but by God's expression. This is the freedom Christ spoke of, the freedom that comes not from what you gain, but from what you release. The belief that you must live your life alone. Let us now continue into the next phase of this journey, how to meet problems from the Christ mind rather than from the struggling self. Now, inevitably, as you move through your day in this new awareness, appearances will arise conditions that seem to contradict the harmony you have begun to feel within. A sudden financial concern, an unexpected conflict, a physical discomfort, a troubling piece of news. In the old consciousness, these events would immediately provoke anxiety, resistance, or frantic planning. The human mind would leap to defend itself, to fix, to correct, to fight, and in doing so, it would fall back into the very identity that creates the grind. But hear this, with all the stillness of your being, the moment you meet a problem as a personal self, you have already lost your peace. Not because the problem has power, but because you have forgotten who you are. The difficulty is not the appearance. The difficulty is the sense of separation that rises within when you believe you must face it alone. The Christ mind, your true consciousness, does not struggle with appearances. It does not fight them. It does not fear them. It simply recognizes the truth behind them. There is no power in the appearance. There is only God. This recognition is not denial. It is not positive thinking. It is not the attempt to replace a negative thought with a positive one. It is the realization that behind every appearance, regardless of how threatening it may seem, the presence is still the only reality. When something arises that would normally disturb you, pause just long enough to remember the truth. Do not rush to affirm away the condition. Do not rush to correct it. Do not rush to resist it. Instead, turn inward to that silent knowing. Father, you are here. You are the only presence. You are the only power. This appearance has no authority over the infinite. In that moment of recognition, the false belief begins to dissolve. The fear loses its root. The mind grows still. You are no longer meeting the problem from the level of the problem. You are meeting it from the level of God. This does not mean the outer condition instantly vanishes, though sometimes it will. It means that its power over you is broken. It means that you no longer respond from fear, but from inner clarity. And in that clarity, the true solution arises not from effort, but from revelation. Not from the intellect, but from the Christ within. For every appearance contains its own answer, waiting to unfold when you cease trying to force one. Every problem carries within it a spiritual message, waiting to be heard when you become still enough to listen. And every challenge becomes an invitation to deepen your recognition of God's presence, not in the future, not in some distant heaven, but right where the problem appears to be. You will notice something astonishing. The moment you refuse to grant an appearance power apart from God, the appearance begins to change. It softens. It yields. It reorganizes itself. Sometimes it resolves outwardly. Sometimes it dissolves inwardly. But always, its seeming power fades, because the only power it ever had was your belief in its reality. This is how the Christ mind meets difficulties, not with resistance, but with recognition, not with struggle, but with stillness. And as you practice this, you discover that problems no longer accumulate as they once did. They lose their grip. They lose their drama. They lose their urgency. They become what they always were, shadows without substance, dissolving in the light of awareness. From this understanding, we move naturally into the next stage of our journey, how grace, once recognized and allowed, quietly reorganizes the entire structure of your life. As you continue in this way, meeting each moment with recognition instead of resistance, turning inward rather than outward, allowing rather than forcing, you will begin to notice something wondrous. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, gently, almost imperceptibly at first, your life begins to change, not because you have worked to change it, but because grace has taken over the activity of your being. Grace does not announce itself. It does not shout. It does not draw attention. It works in the silence, beneath the surface, reordering the structure of your life without fanfare, without spectacle, without the noise of human effort. And when you look back after some weeks, some months, you will say, something has shifted, something has softened, something has opened in me. You will discover that problems arise less frequently, and when they do appear, they do not cling to you as they once did. They lose their stickiness, their emotional weight. They pass through quickly, like clouds across a clear sky. You will discover that relationships begin to harmonize not because others have changed, but because you no longer meet them from the limited self. You meet them from the Christ. And the Christ sees only the Christ in another. You will find that supply appears in ways you could never have arranged. Not through manipulation, not through strain, not through competition, but through a natural flow that seems to know your needs before you speak them. You will find that ideas come to you without effort, that inspiration rises without force, that solutions reveal themselves without struggle. And perhaps most beautiful of all, you will find that fear loosens its grip, not because you have worked to overcome fear, but because you no longer believe in the one who fears. The false identity, the one that lives by worry, by tension, by control, slowly dissolves in the light of your recognition. And as it dissolves, the deep peace that is the nature of your true self begins to shine through. This peace is not the absence of conflict. It is not the stillness of a quiet room. It is the peace of divine certainty, the peace that knows God is the only power, the only presence, the only law. It is the peace that comes from living not by the mind, but by the Spirit. It is the peace that Jesus spoke of when he said, "My peace I give unto you." It is the peace of knowing that life itself carries you. Grace does not simply fix your life. It transforms your relationship to life. It changes the inner lens through which you perceive the world. You no longer walk as a frightened individual trying to survive. You walk as a divine expression through which the infinite reveals its own nature. This unseen transformation is the quiet miracle of spiritual living. It is the fruit of your recognition. It is the evidence that God is functioning as your consciousness. And once this transformation begins, it does not stop. It deepens. It widens. It expands into every area of your being, your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, your relationships, your work, your health. You come to realize that life is no longer something happening to you. Life is happening through you. And this realization carries you gently into the next stage of our unfolding, the high art of living entirely by grace, especially when circumstances seem most challenging. And so, my friends, we come to the close of this contemplation not as an ending, but as a beginning, an opening through which you may step into a new way of living. For what we have explored together is not theory, not philosophy, not another spiritual technique to add to the burden of the personal self. It is a revelation of truth. It is the unveiling of the life that has been living you since the beginning. It is the invitation to step out of the grind and into grace. You were never meant to carry the weight of your own existence. You were never meant to force your way through life with fear as your compass and effort as your only tool. All of that belongs to the false identity, the one who believes itself separate from God. But the truth is that you have never been separate. Not for a moment, not in your greatest struggle, nor in your deepest confusion. The presence has always been here, closer than breath, closer than thought, living you, sustaining you, loving you. Grace is not something you must earn. Grace is not something you must deserve. Grace is the very nature of your being. It is the rhythm of the infinite expressing itself as your life. And the moment you turn inward, even slightly, to acknowledge this presence, grace becomes active in your experience. It takes over where your effort ends. It guides where your mind falters. It supplies where your fear trembles. It heals where your belief sees limitation. You need not perfect this practice. You need not master anything. You need only recognize. Recognize the truth behind all appearances. Recognize the presence that lives you. Recognize the Christ that is your own being. Each recognition, no matter how small, dissolves a layer of the old identity and reveals a greater measure of the life you were always meant to live. So as you step from this moment into the rest of your day, carry this knowing gently within you. You do not walk alone. You do not act alone. You do not think alone. The Father within you doeth the works. Rest in this truth. Yield to it. Trust it. Let it become the foundation of your morning, the companion of your noon, the peace of your evening. Let every breath remind you, I and the Father are one. When this becomes your living awareness, the grind evaporates, and grace becomes the atmosphere in which you move. And so I leave you with this gentle invitation, not as a command, not as a discipline, but as a remembrance of what is already true. Live by grace, live from the Christ within. Let God be the life of your life, and you will discover a freedom the world cannot give and a peace the world cannot take away. The journey does not begin tomorrow. It does not begin when you feel ready. It begins now with your next breath, your next moment of stillness, your next willingness to remember the presence that has never left you. Thank you, beloved friends, for walking this truth with me today.